Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward. All right, welcome to Happy Path Programming. Oh, we have a fun one today. So we have Stephan Janssen. Did I say Janssen, right?
Yeah, Janssen.
You're from Belgium, and so the J's are a little different there.
Correct.
Well, it's great to have you. Let's start with this. You've been a developer for a long time, like
Yes.
what, 20, 30 years, 40?
Oh man, it's longer. I think I was doing first basic on a Commodore 64, as many of us probably started there, and then I switched to assembly because I wanted to play and create games, but more hack games. And they put our intro in front of it and then distribute the games around the world. So it was more like a hacking assembly type of thing.
Huh.
But yeah, so from my 15, 16 years, I started. And then luckily, I did a switch when I was 28 to Java. And thanks to Bruce Thinking in Java book. Seriously, I mean, I used your book as the syllabus for teaching Java to many, many people.
I'm kind of embarrassed about that by now because there were things that I've learned that I go, oh, maybe we shouldn't have leaned so hard into the objects.
Well, it was just a path on part of the journey.
It's still a great book.
Yeah, I mean, it helped so many people level up in their careers and how they write code. So.
Yeah, and then the other one was Java in a Nutshell from Flanagan. I mean, I think those were two books really sitting next to my bed around 95, 96. And then basically started the Java user group in 98, which then gave birth to Java Polis, which then rebranded in 2008 to Devox.
Yeah.
And then Devox, now we have like 7 Devoxes, 15 Vox days, and 20,000 developers reaching or attending the events on an annual basis.
Yeah, and that's where many people may know Stephan is from Devox. So we've got Devox coming up, Devox Belgium coming up in a couple months. So super excited I get to be there again. But yeah, do you want to say anything about Devox coming up? I mean, there's no tickets available because they sell out in 2 seconds or whatever. But
well, they get allocated in 2 seconds, but then people start releasing them once they internally verified if everybody got a ticket. So we announced it this morning at 9:00. There were like 4,600 people online refreshing. Tickets were all allocated in 2 seconds, but then luckily some started like, okay, we've got enough. Let's release them now because they have 25 minutes to actually reserve the tickets. So there's still some tickets out there. No conference tickets, but we have still the 5-day ticket or the 5 days tickets, which are the common tickets.
Including
and it's
workshops,
from the 7th to the 11th of October. And we normally have about 3,500 people attending.
Awesome. I'm excited to go back.
Crazy. Actually, can I insert?
Oh yeah, you got to plug.
We are having a developer retreat / hangout. Very low or no structure at all.
Just informal developers get together.
Exactly. August 28th through September 1st, and this is here in Crested Butte. So it's anyway.
Awesome.
If
anybody wants to come out and hang out with some nerds and write some code,
we just have a few people showing up at this point, but it's not. There's no structure to it, and it doesn't cost anything. You just have to come prepared to stay in a motel or camp or something like that.
And where do people get more information about?
We just kind of nailed it down.
We have the Winter Tech Forum Slack group.
Yeah, that's probably the best place. Sorry, it's so
people can get access to.
Like it's super casual to the point where it's we don't really have much in the way of officialness. Okay.
All right. Well, let's dive into our subject for today. So, Stephan, you have, in your journey as a developer, you've discovered this future of being a developer, which is both using AI tools and like as a developer, but then also building things with AI and Gen AI. So, I don't know, maybe just start with telling us about like, where are you with all this stuff?
Sure.
How are you using these things?
Right. And is your tool the one that you mentioned before we started recording? That's an AI tool?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can also tell us
Well,
about that.
let me do one step
Yes.
backwards, in the sense that I actually started using convolutional neural networks in 2016, 2017. And the reason why is that my son plays basketball, and I was always, or I'm still recording the games, but I wanted to create automatically the highlights of the game. So what I did is I took 4,000 pictures of a ball, converted them a bit in different shapes and different directions. So I had 12,000 versions of those pictures, and then created a model so I could identify in a video stream where the ball was. And then I did the same for the hoop, and I created a rectangle above the hoop, a rectangle below the hoop. And if the ball was in one of those rectangles, most likely a point was made, so I could actually identify the highlights in a basketball game. So
Wow.
that was my first steps a bit in, like, I mean, I try to automate lots of hobbies of mine, and that's definitely one of them. And so that was a really
Automate your
interesting
hobbies
journey.
through AI. I love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, once it gets boring where you need to commercialize it, that's where I stop, because then you have the hassle of customers and support, and no,
Those
then it's
pesky
yeah,
customers. You pay us
Your
money.
plate is full with customers when you're dealing with conferences. So you didn't need any more of that.
yeah, exactly.
So you were like into this AI stuff
Before it was cool.
before it was cool.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Very,
more or less. And
very
again, on a
hipster of you.
pragmatic level, right? I mean, I needed a solution, and what's the best way to get there, and whatever it takes to get there, read the books, get the courses, and whatever. And that's the fun part. And I think it was right after COVID that I started playing with GPT-2. And then gradually, because I was doing, NLP, natural language processing, already quite a while, because we have like thousands of proposals, and I want to always automate it. Like, one of the things I wanted to do was, like, people had to enter their tags when they submit a talk. But it was like, the tags are in the description, in the title, so we need to just extract that automatically, right? So that's something that's very easy to do now, but it wasn't that obvious 3-4 years ago. Um, if you wanted to use a large language model for that, right? But also, other things I did was, 2 years ago, I built like a prototype called DevOps Insights. And what it did is that I wrote some Python. It was a lot of Python, not Java, unfortunately, where we published all the talks on YouTube. I downloaded the transcript from YouTube, and then summarized the transcript, so you got a summarization of the talk. And so that was already nice. So you didn't have to watch the full talk, you got a real summarization. Then other things I did was like face recognition. We have a really amazing photographer taking thousands of pictures during DevOps events. So what I'm doing now, already for many years, is taking your Twitter avatar and showing you all the pictures that we found in our big database. We have like 25,000 pictures that we've indexed. And so speakers will get, the next day or the week after, they will get all their pictures from the events. And so they don't have to search through 3,500 pictures per event. So these are all like very pragmatic, but it brings added value to the DevOps experience. And so that's really where the fun started. Is like leveraging models. And then the next logical thing was, like, for example, creating a summarization. So if people submit a talk, some they submit like a full A4 abstract. And as a reviewer, if you have to review 900 talks, you just want to have an executive summary. So that's also in the CFP, is that it creates a summary, which, again, now with large language models, it's really, really that easy, right?
Yeah.
So that's really
Can
where
you ask? Can you give it an abstract and be like, "Is this going to be a good talk?"
no, that's I think a bit more difficult, because
Still
you
need
need to
the
compare.
humans.
Well, you need to compare it also with because a conference is like a story you want to tell, right? You really want to start with introductory talks, and then follow up with more advanced, and maybe a hands-on lab, and then a few more that go in more detail. And so that storyline needs to be identified. So it's probably possible with a bit of prompting, etc., but you need to give it a lot of content.
Yeah.
And 1 year ago, that wasn't possible. I mean, 1 year ago, we could give 4,000 tokens. One token is on average 3 to 4 characters, right? So I don't know if you followed the strawberry thing on Twitter, where you ask ChatGPT, how many R's does strawberry have? And it was always replying incorrectly. And why? Because strawberry has, like, depending on the model, it could have 2 or 3 tokens where it doesn't know about the 2 R's in the one token. It only knows about the token, not the individual letters. You see? So anyway, 1 year ago, we had like a window context. So if you create a prompt and you send it to the model, you have a window context. So that's the number of tokens that you can send it. And the maximum was 4,000 tokens. So that's like 12,000 characters average, which is not a lot.
Not a lot. Yeah.
Now, do you know how much we have in tokens in a Windows context?
How much?
2 million.
2 million.
Oh,
okay.
2
And
million
so
tokens.
just in the last year or two, we've gone from 4,000 to 2 million.
Well,
that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and Bill took our book and asked it to generate a back cover blurb for it, and he fed it the whole book, and actually what it generated was
pretty amazing.
Don't really have any argument with that.
Paragraph summary of a whole book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, I've got another Antonio Gonzalez. He's writing also a book, and he contacted me on Monday, and I said, yeah, just give it to Gemini. With Gemini, Google Gemini is the one who has 2 million. His book was only 90,000 tokens. 90,000 tokens these days is peanuts.
Nowhere near the limit, yeah.
Even a local model already supports up to 130,000 tokens just running on your machine.
Yeah.
That's in 1 year.
The pace is just insane.
It's exponential.
So I have a question. I understand. I did take linear algebra when I was in college, but I don't remember much about it at this point. I understand that you have to know linear algebra to be able to understand LLMs, or
no
is that
way.
not true?
No, you don't.
You don't.
Break it down for us. What is a model? What is a token? What is inference? Like what are all these pieces?
Yeah. So the beauty is that there's definitely a lot of mathematics underneath. But as a developer, you just talk to a REST interface. That's really what it boils down to. You have a REST interface, and this is called like these LLM providers, where you basically talk to a REST interface, you give it a context, you give it a prompt, you give it a temperature. That's really important, where the temperature dictates if it's going to be creative or if it's going to be strict. If it's strict, it will always give the same answer. But if you give it creativity, like 0.7, it will give constantly a different answer, but in a different flavor, right? So there's a few parameters, which maybe 5, 6 maximum, and that's it. You send it as a JSON to this LLM provider, and it will return a JSON back with the answer, the tokens it took, maybe even the cost it took to produce it. And this is calculated on the input tokens and the output tokens. So the input tokens can go to almost 2 million. The return or the output tokens is often only 4,000 tokens because it's just a short answer, right? But this is also growing eventually. And so there's multiple different implementations. So the beauty, and that's why I'm so excited about it, is that there's this open, don't get me started on OpenAI, because they're the least open of all the LLM providers. But there are multiple open initiatives. For example, Meta is really pioneering, and most likely from a business strategy point of view, a very smart move. They've basically released in open source their models called Llama 3.1, which is the latest one. They come in different flavors. So you have like the lowest one is 7 billion parameters that it has been trained on. The highest one
parameter. So what does a parameter mean in this case?
So you beneath it, you basically have a neural network, and it's all the parameters that it actually has been, has been trained upon. And so it uses weights to identify what route it needs to follow via the different neurons. So the weights with the highest number will actually be the one that dictates the route of the response. And in all simplicity, it is basically just a text extender, a text completer, because you give it some words, and based on the statistic meaning, the semantic meaning of those words, and that's the big difference. Since large language models, before large language models, we did not have the semantic meaning of a word. With large language models, we now have a semantic meaning. So it knows if you have a bank where you take money or a bank where you sit, it knows based on the semantic context what the bank word means. And that's the big differentiator. When you were doing just NLP, there wasn't really this semantic meaning. Now we have. So now it really knows what a sentence means if you're using the word bank.
And that semantic meaning gets encoded in the training phase. So when it's
Yes.
coming up with the model, it has somehow encoded semantic meaning into that model.
Correct. Yeah, correct. But the beauty of us being developers is that we just need to know the REST interface. So that makes it the entry is so low for developers because you just need to do a REST call. That's it. And so what's happening is that OpenAI has dictated a bit how the structure should be, and then many others like Anthropic, Google, but even Meta and so on, they are following that structure. So there's a bit of standardization happening, which is great. But now, for example, just this week, there's already a new feature being added, which is called cache control. So what they want to do is that you give it like a big corpus, like your book. You give it your book, and I will only give it the book once because it's cached in the server side. And then I can start asking questions. So the input tokens and the output tokens, but the book is cached. So I don't have to send it each time with every request. Well, that full cache control for the moment is only being implemented by Anthropic and by Google. And of course, they both are doing the different syntax in the JSON format. Yeah. So like if you then are looking at APIs who work on a higher level, they need to try to find a common denominator to actually standardize that. So there's a bit of, once hopefully OpenAI joins with the cache control, there's going to be conversions where standardization will happen on that level as well.
And then there's other pieces that are kind of related to this interface to the LLM, like functions and RAGs. Yes. And yes. So there's other kind of ancillary things around it as well. Maybe give us a rundown.
Hey, what's a RAG?
Let's have Stephan tell us all about it.
So, well, the RAG was really Retrieval Augmented Generation, that's called, that's the acronym. It was basically generated for multiple reasons. One reason was because we can only give context of 4,000 tokens. So if I wanted to, like, for example, do a Q&A on your book, I could index your book into vectors. So basically what it does is that words are converted to vector, which is a float. And that float, that vector, has that semantic meaning, right? So you basically have an array of vectors, which represents your words of your book. And then I could do a search on that vector. So the search would be a similarity search. So what I do is, like, for example, I would say, what is the book about, right? So it would change my question into vectors. And then I have like maybe 12 vectors. And I will do a similarity search on the vector array of your book with the vector questioned vector string, and it will do. It has different formulas, but the one will be the nearest point similarity result, where basically you need to see these vectors as dots in a space, like a dot cloud. And it would put your question into that cloud, and all the dots which are nearest are most likely have a close semantic meaning. So that would mean that most likely, if I say, what's the book about? You might have had a chapter which was about this book. So it would put my question next to your about this book, and then take that chunk of text from your book as the prompt context to the question that is sent to the LLM. So what it would do is that, so it would say, what is the book about in the prompt? And in addition to the prompt, which is your window context, it would put your page about this book in the prompt. So then the LLM, which has no idea about your book because it's not public, it's not been indexed, it knows the question, it knows this context of 4,000 tokens maximum. So it could answer that question based on that small text I've given it, right? And that's
so this was like zooming out for a second. I remember Paul Snively. I don't remember if it was on our podcast with him or just in a conversation with him. He was like, a lot of this AI stuff, maybe all of it, is really just compression. It's like we're taking a bunch of data, we're compressing it down, and that's, I think, why you're saying like the input contexts are larger than the output context, because in a lot of ways the things that we want to use these for is just taking a lot of information and reducing it down. And so RAG was or is a way to like almost do like a pre-compression of some associated specific data, so that then the LLM kind of has some additional information so that it can give you back new or better information.
Correct. Well, it helps with hallucination because what happens is that if they train a model, it has a state of information when the model was trained. So if it was trained 2 years ago, it does not know about Kamala Harris and the presidential things going on. So there's like this gap of information, a cutoff information. So if you have questions about what happened after the model was created, you need to supplement that with RAG techniques.
Okay.
But also, other companies are doing this for private data. So you can just take a large language model which knows about the language, the English language, and a bit of internet information that it has compressed. But if you want to add then confidential data, you need to use RAG to actually implement and supplement
Yeah.
the context, basically, with that.
So it's like
So,
filling in some gaps in
yes.
what the model knows,
Yeah.
and
And it
using
helps with hallucinations.
vectorization to do that.
Yeah, it helps with hallucinations because you basically are providing it with more accurate data in the prompt context.
Now, given that our context windows are getting larger, is this go away at some
yeah,
point because we
exactly.
can
Well,
just provide it all in the input context?
yes, yes. But I mean, that's at least my view. Is that yes? What I'm doing currently, like I'll tell you a bit more about the plugin later on. But basically, what you can do is you can give your full project, like a Java project. So I had an idea to do photo sharing for DevOps Belgium, and I built it in 16 hours just with an LLM. And the project was like 70,000 tokens. So I could give the full project in the context and then say, hey, build me this feature. And it would build the feature because it had knowledge of my full project. And it's like,
I understand JetBrains is their AI system, which I just paid for a subscription, will do things like it knows your whole project, and so, for example, it can generate test code for you and stuff like that.
so that's a
You're not
great
sure
point
about that.
you're bringing up, Bruce, because last year at DevOps Belgium, during the opening keynote, I had Anton from JetBrains do the opening keynote where he demonstrated the AI assistant. It was basically shown during the keynote. This was 1 year ago. And the question I asked him to Anton on stage, it's on YouTube, you can find it. I said, like, are you guys going to support local models? And he said, well, I can't yet answer that. And I said, and if you do, will it be pluggable so I can work with any LLM provider? And 4 months later, like in February, they still hadn't replied. And then I went like, okay, well, it's not going to happen. I'll build my own plugin. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 6 months now, is that I build a plugin for IntelliJ in open source, free, but it works with local models, any local model, and cloud models. And you just pay. If it's a cloud model, you just need to get the API key and you pay for the API key. But the beauty of the plugin is that it allows you, based on the window context available of the model that you've chosen or the provider you've chosen, it allows you to completely copy your project in the window context and then start chatting away.
Yeah.
And that's where, in my opinion, I've called it the era of the ape. But the ape in the Dutch spelling, it's AAP. And AAP stands for AI Augmented Programming. Because we are really entering, and it's a revolution. It really is. I mean, I'm an average developer, but with these assistants, I'm becoming a senior expert, 10 times developer, full web stack, guys. It's
I
unbelievable.
had an experience over a year ago where I had fallen into Rust, and I was really focused on it for a couple of months. And partway through, I started using the AI, and the instead of reading somebody else's book and their examples that they thought were in order, if you go, oh, I'm interested in this right now, create me an example, and then you study that example, I found that accelerated my learning dramatically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it is like it's basically an AI or a senior expert that you have on your side 24/7, and it costs you $20 a month.
And I think a huge part of it is the fact that in our world, it's all about knowledge, and that's our status and everything. And if you admit that you don't know something, even if you get used to doing that, it's still hard sometimes. Whereas when you're talking to the AI, there's no judgment. You can ask the dummest question you want.
Well, it's always like, oh, that was a great question. You're like, thanks. I thought that was a great question.
Well, and there's things that I haven't asked forever because, everybody knows this, and I'd look dumb. And then I'm happy to ask that, and it'll explain it to me, and it goes, oh, this is great. Yeah, so those two things I think are just amazing.
Yeah, and it seems like there are tasks where this is really well suited. Like you mentioned learning. So I'm new to Amazon. I've been having to learn a whole bunch of new things. And oh my God, I use Q Developer since that's Amazon's thing and it's in IntelliJ. And I'm just asking questions to it all day long as I'm learning new things. And so learning seems like, of course, you're going to use these tools when you're learning something new. But what about when you're, I don't know, just like writing a boring CRUD application or something?
Perfect.
But even so, like the photo app I was talking about is a stupid photo app, but it was like I was able to really from scratch. I started on Sunday afternoon, and on Monday evening, I had a fully working deployed application doing sophisticated things, which I would have, if I would have done it from scratch without an assistant, it would have taken me 3 weeks for sure. Right.
Yeah.
And that was like in 16 hours. That's like,
so accelerated even kind of the boring stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, in particular, the boring stuff. Because it's like when you go in to try and do something and you go, oh, I'm going to have to go look up this and figure that out. And it's like, it sounds like, and when it gives you that, and then you can focus on, oh, I want to make it do this or that. I don't know. I have found it just to be dramatically helpful in dealing with.
The tool I've used, guys, is the one from Anthropic called Claude. So Claude has multiple models. The lowest one is Haiku. Then you have Sonnet, and then you have Opus. So the one in the middle, Sonnet, is version 3.5. It has a window context of 200,000 tokens. You pay $20 a month. And what it has as a unique feature is that it allows you to create a project. So you create a project and it uses this cache thing. So what you can do, you create a project like my photo app, and then you give it the full source code. Now, to give it the full source code, there's a few tools you need to use. There was one tool that I used to use called code to prompt. So it was like just a shell script, Python script, code to prompt. And what it did is that it went recursively through your directory, created a tree of your project, and then it copied all the files underneath each other. And that was one big text file, right? And well, you then copy, and it immediately puts it in the clipboard. So you paste that output into the project. But the cool thing is, this project was 70,000 tokens. I still had 130,000 tokens still available. So you can actually add extra PDF files or extra documents or other libraries that you're interested in using as a context, and then you start chatting. And that program was basically created just with prompts. Yeah. So it was like really producing code. Like I was saying, like, oh yeah, so you have to create, but you have to give it some good context. So you need to be like a technical project manager, which has to write the specs for the application. That's really important. And so being a developer and even a senior developer does help, because you can say like, okay, I want to use Angular 17, I want to use Spring Boot 3.2, I want to use Firebase. So you give it all those details, and then you start giving it the use cases of what you want. And it basically guides you through it. And if you would see my arm, there's goosebumps all over here, because it's like, bloody hell, I'm living science fiction. This shouldn't be happening in my lifetime. And it is. And it's only, I mean, this is the worst
It's
it's ever
moving
going to be.
so fast. Like we've got, all sorts of different tools that are becoming available, and then tools that are just making this all essentially transparent, where you don't even have to like do the prompt or code to
No.
prompt thing and copy it in. Like so, Q Developer that I've been using has like now a way to create the local vector database all transparently of your code, and then you can ask questions of your code. So like
Yeah.
the tools are just evolving so quickly in this space. It's
And
unreal.
that's
So
what
let me get some clarification. You said that your favorite AI tool is Anthropic?
Yeah, so I'm using Anthropic Claude Sonnet 3.5, but the problem
3.5
there
is
is
so
that
good. It's
3.5 is
I've been using it for a number of things at work,
unbelievable.
and it's unbelievable.
It is on the next level, and Opus is going to be even better, and they're going to release it end of this year, probably after the elections. But Opus is going to be even better. So it's like bloody. But the problem, to come to your question, Bruce, is that you can only for $20 you can only ask that many questions per day. So you run out of basically credits per day rapidly because you're including the full project in the cache and it takes a bit of tokens. So what I do then is that I move back to IntelliJ and I use my own plugin, Devox Genie, where I use the API key of Anthropic. And I basically just continue in the development environment of IntelliJ with my plugin.
Yeah.
And so there, I've basically, I took the PHP code of code to prompt, gave it to Claude, said like rewrite it in Java for an IntelliJ plugin, and then basically add it to my plugin. So now I can do a right click on my project in IntelliJ and say copy project to clipboard or copy project to prompt, and it's in my prompt. It shows how much it's going to cost you if you send that, and so on. And you basically continue in the development environment.
So
And that's like,
what's the plugin that you created called Devox Genie or something?
yeah, Devox Genie. So it was basically out of the frustration of IntelliJ not supporting local models
Yeah.
and not being really open. Because I understand, I mean, they have to make a business out of it, and I mean, I'm not really into that.
I
I'm
think
more
that
interested
their new multi-line completion is local
is
model
local.
driven, but it's not. As far
It's
as I
not
know,
really,
that local model is not trained on your
no.
project and not very customizable and stuff. So.
I can't use a one line code completion, especially if you can run Devox Genie with a local model. So there's multiple local models providers that you can install. You have like LM Studio, you have Jan, but the most known one is Olama, which is basically a wrapper around Llama CPP. And Llama CPP is like, you remember the James FFmpeg?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was like the Swiss Army knife to
Yeah,
do video cutting and
still
whatever.
is, right? Yeah.
Well, Llama CPP is like the Swiss Army knife for large language models for local and especially
Okay.
for Apple Silicon as well.
Okay. Huh.
So you can basically run it. It's in C++, but it has Apple Windows versions. You
Huh.
can run it and you link it to a model that you download from Hugging Face, and it runs natively on your Apple Silicon.
Huh.
And what it does is that it creates a web server which you can then talk to, very similar to the OpenAI REST API. You can just talk to it locally from your machine, from Devox Genie or whatever.
And when you say Apple Silicon, you mean like the M1, M2, M3
Yes,
chips? Yeah,
yes,
because it needs that speed.
yes. Well, I don't know the full details. I mean, you should really try to get I think, what's his name? George, he's from Bulgaria. Jerganov, Georgi. I
The
mean,
llama
I tried to
CPP
get
guy.
him to Devox Belgium, but he's
Huh.
just too busy. If you look at his GitHub stats, he's just all over the place.
So I
But
think let's hop back for a second. I think a lot of people think about the AI assistant, coding assistant, as being primarily around code completion. Like, oh, isn't it amazing that the AI can like just write a bunch of code for me? But I haven't found that to be the most valuable part of these code assistants. But tell me your perspective on this. Like, we were just kind of like talking about how the multi-line completion, like maybe that's not the most valuable thing here.
no, not yet. Well, they've just recently, I think this week, announced the code completion for your shell command. So you can like enter like, hey, I'm looking for a command to do a list of the ports that I'm listening on, and it will then give you the command that it needs to run. I mean, that's already interesting.
Yeah.
Um, But I mean, for me, it's really like the fact that you can give it the full context of your project. You have the expert who knows the full project, and if you want to write unit test or integration test, it will. And you even can say, "Hey, write it with JUnit 5 and use Mockito for that." It will do an amazing job because it has all that the full context of your project. And I think that's the big eye opener. The other thing is that I'm sometimes on a train or on a plane, and I'm very productive on a train, but there's no internet. Well, then the AI assistant can't really help me, or I need to use my 4G. And so having local models, for example, Llama 3.1, it will help you in very good ways, which, I mean, they're getting so much better in every new releases that eventually we'll just have it locally running. But the cool thing is that that's what I'm now doing a bit of research on, is that we will move towards a large language model sharding. So, database sharding.
Yeah.
So they're now doing this for large language models, because the problem is if you have a Llama 3.1, the 405 billion parameters, I think it's like, it could be like 50 or 100 gigs. I haven't downloaded it, but it's huge in size, right?
Yeah.
So you can't run it on one machine unless you have like a really beefy $100,000 machine. So what you're doing is that you're doing sharding where you only load a number of tensors based on the vertical or horizontal sharding. You can basically say only load a portion of that model into that machine, the other portion in that machine, and the last portion in another machine. And you create like a mesh of these three machines which talk to each other. And so if you give a prompt,
It's like model microservices.
whatever, it will go through all the different models on your different machines and then basically concatenate the result and give it to you. It will still take a bit of time.
I've heard that one of the challenges with this approach is that somewhere you have to have a router that knows, like, oh, you're talking about banks. How does it know that you're talking about like the bank that you get your money out of versus the other kind of bank? And so the like first entry point into understanding how to then route to one of these other micro models,
but it's different.
that thing has to be pretty knowledgeable about everything to then determine
That's
content.
a different approach, James. That's not a sharding approach.
Oh, okay.
That's really
So
a routing
different.
where you go like, okay, go to this specialized narrow model which knows about the financial institutions.
Yeah.
That's basically what Apple is doing with their new iPhone, is that they have like these adapters, and these are small large language models, and they're specialized in a certain area. For example, anything to do with the help system of an iPhone, it will have like an adapter for that.
Okay.
And so it will do a routing based on your question. It will go to this model or that model.
But the sharding is different. The sharding is different. It's like database sharding, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's cutting a large model which could never run on one machine into pieces and creating a glue where it goes and uses X amount of tensors on one machine and then goes and takes the output of those tensors, give it as input to the next layers of the tensors that machine supports, and so on. And basically allows you to have a huge large language model, like 400 billion parameters.
So it's like the RAID arrays of models. So like how a RAID could give you a virtual disk across many physical disks.
Yeah, like paging.
So it's somehow dividing your model so that you can have those layers. How does that get figured out?
How I visualize it for the moment is that you have like a starting node and an end node, and in between you have multiple nodes which are connected. And so you can have a vertical slice of sharding, or you can do a horizontal slice of sharding. And they are basically sharing the output becomes the input for, the output becomes the input for the next shard.
Right. Because is the model a graph? And so you can determine at what point you want to chop the graph and move it over and say, okay, once you reach this node, you can't go to the next node. You have to go to this other machine or something to get to the next node.
Yeah. And the beauty is Apple is starting to see the potential, and they've released a library called MLX. And MLX is a Python and a C++ library which actually supports this on silicon. So that's why I'm an Apple fanboy. So I have all Apple machines here. And so my plan is to basically write that in Java, but using the Python library or the C++ library, using JNI or the PyGral. I mean, Gral now has also a Python version. So I'm in talks with the Gral people to see, hey, how can we make this work? Because it would make it a cool demo for DevOps.
Definitely.
Is like create this sharding using Java, using gRPC to coordinate, and then I think I'm using JMDNS to basically do discovery of the different clients. And it's so much fun. It's so much fun. But it will not only the fun, it will allow me to run a model which has like 400 billion parameters. So I will have a much more knowledgeable expert next to me helping me without internet connection.
I mean, it doesn't seem like we're that far from having essentially infinitely sized models. Like so large that's no longer a constraint. Because right now, it seems like there is a bit of a constraint on the size of our models. How big they can be is how much they know and how good they are. And the larger they get, the better they get. Generally, I'm sure there's many other things that make them better as well. But the curve of this is a hockey stick,
Yes.
and we're going to reach the point where the models are very sufficiently large enough. So then what's the next challenge? Is like figuring out the places where these things can make our lives better. Like it's made you a more productive developer. It's enabled you to solve things like the basketball detection, highlight detection. So it's helped you solve some use cases. But where's this going, I guess?
Well, that's where I'm using a phrase. We are like at this quantum superposition state, which is both frightening and exciting at the same time, because it's amazing, but it's also really frightening. I mean, if we extrapolate this, it might be that we just need people who write the specs and the code just comes out, and the code might not be Java. It might just be pure assembly because it knows how to create assembly for that specific device, and we will not understand even what it produces. And that's why I call it APE, the augmented or the AI augmented programming, because it's the next level of a Stack Overflow where you basically are copying code without understanding what you're copying, but it's working. But you don't know what it's doing.
Yeah, but how different is that from every level that we've come up before?
Oh,
You know, when we used
abstraction.
we had everybody was programming in assembly language, and we had higher level languages, and now we don't know what's happening at the machine level. So,
I fully
yeah.
agree. But as
So
a
I did a
developer,
whole podcast on exactly that topic with Simon Maple, that just
yeah.
came out this week. So we talked about this idea of like maybe the future programmer just writes the specification,
Yes.
and who cares how the AI actually comes up with the implementation?
Well, and I could see programs of the future as being more interactive in terms of what the user needs. Like we have a bookstore here, and they're using ancient software, but it's not economically viable to put a team together to build new bookstore software.
Yeah.
But if they could work with maybe one developer and an AI, and then once the program was created, if they needed a new feature, they'd go, oh, you know what I really needed to do is this. And it could be just something that would automatically be integrated.
Like
Absolutely.
changing the economic
needs.
Incentives around this, or the economic structure, because right now there's not an economic benefit to anybody to create the app that the bookstore needs to manage
and
their
a
business.
lot of other things. When you think about it, you go, oh no, it's the same thing we had before, where it's like, oh no, programmers are going to be obsolete. And it's like, well, actually, most of the programs that we need, the economics haven't been there to justify writing them.
Yeah.
And now this changes that. This makes it possible.
So instead of saying we don't need programmers anymore, it's like, think of all the things that programmers could do,
right,
and the problems they could solve with these tools.
But what you see on Reddit, for example, there's so many people who are saying, look at what I've built, and I'm not a programmer. I did not do any coding 1 week ago, but now I have creative ideas, and I have the way to actually make them with this tool which guides me step by step.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's
And
nice.
well, like the film industry is all
Yes.
worried about this, but I think, well, look at what it's doing now. It's turning out these horrible movies and spending tons of money on them, and they're awful because you have a bunch of studio executives screwing around with the creatives. Now, if you can let the creatives go directly to film, we'll see a lot of terrible things, but we will see things that will not get made in Hollywood, and they'll be way better.
Bruce, the next version of Netflix will be called Netflix AI, and you will say, I want to see a horror movie with DiCaprio where he marries this person, what? And it will be created based on the prompt that you gave it, and it will basically create the movie for you. And this is maybe that's going to be possible in 2 years' time, not longer. I mean, I can
And you,
already now create music
oh
just with a
yeah,
prompt.
no, I have a friend who has been writing musicals, and he's using that for that. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, because often I'll be watching a movie and it'll get to a point and I'll go, "Oh, this is stupid," or "I don't like this," or whatever. And if I could just go in and go, "Yeah, don't do that. Do something else,"
Yeah,
because this is redundant or
yeah.
uninteresting to me.
Absolutely, have this ending instead of that one, and
Uh
or have
huh.
this character in there, and
Right.
I mean, that's going to happen for sure. I mean, if you look at Runway, you give it a picture, which basically the picture is already generated by a prompt as well, and then it creates a 10 to 20 seconds video based on that picture that you gave it,
Mm.
and it's super realistic. Or depending on the style that you want, it could be a drawing or whatever you call. Like bloody hell! I mean,
Mm-hmm.
So we're feeling somewhat good about the opportunity for AI to not squash human creativity, but actually enhance and grow it and
Augment.
give us more space to
yeah,
live more creatively. And
Hmm. Well, the other thing I've thought of many times is the idea that here these companies are constantly, oh, buy our product. I don't trust any of them, of course, because they have. What I want is my own personal AI that knows my particular tastes, and so when I say, you know what, I need a new office chair, and it goes, I know what you need.
your
Just get this.
personal shopper,
And the thing is,
the
I
AI
don't
personal
buy a
shopper.
lot of stuff because I'm overwhelmed with the research that's
yeah.
necessary. But if I had the thing that I trusted that was acting in my interest, then I would buy more stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's happening, Bruce. I mean, this week Google announced Pixel 9. So, and the same with AI from Apple, the Apple Intelligence, smartly named. It's happening. What they basically are doing is that on the device, they're vectorizing all of your data, which is on the device, and it stays on the device. So it has all this information, which it can then use as a way to do prompting or based on your question. It will inject the context, which it already knows about what's on your phone, and it will be able to give personalized, recommendations or whatever. That's you
There,
should check out the Google Pixel
well, yeah,
demos.
and Windows had that new thing they were talking about where it was like basically screenshotting your whole system at
Yeah,
30
that's
frames a second
scary.
or something, which is terrifying. But at the same time, there has been many times where I'm like, I want to be able to ask a question to the history of my interactions on my computer. Like that's
Sure.
totally a valid use case, and I would love to be able to do that. But yeah, there's
It
like
has to stay on device. I mean, if for all of a sudden that gets hacked and it gets spread, people will really know what you've done every second of the moment that it
yeah.
created a snapshot.
It
Uh,
has to act in the individual's interest for
yes.
sure. That's what.
And
Well, and the AI should know how to do that.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
should be able to be like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should stop recording at this point.
Hmm.
It should be able
Yeah.
to make those
Or
decisions.
maybe I could just say, "Hey, there's something wrong with my internet. Can you figure it out?" And then talk to the
God, wouldn't that
provider
be
for
amazing?
me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's your own personal assistant.
but going back to your first question, James, when you said like, okay, you have large language models, you have RAG, and then you were talking about tools and agents. There's also the tools are also a very interesting aspect of the whole
Good.
large language models,
Tell us
because
about
now like there's a talk I remember. Well, we selected a talk for DevOps Belgium about everybody hates date time, right? Playing with date time and time zones, etc. Well, with a large language model, you can actually ask a question in Java. So well, first of all, I need to roll back a bit. Last year, I had contact with a guy who started LangChain4j. And there's LangChain, which is a Python library, and his ambition was to create a Java version of that. And he's an amazing developer, but he's not very good in public speaking. So we had a lady, Liz Raas, who's a Belgian but lives in Switzerland, who did the presentation at DevOps Belgium last year. And since then, LangChain4j has just skyrocketed within the Java community. And so that's the Java API. If you want to talk to large language models locally or in the cloud, that's the API you need to use.
It's like a unified API for talking to either local or cloud model.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. It's open source. It's really lots of contributors. And it also supports this aspect of tooling. So what you can do is that you can create like a prompt where you say, what is the date time on February 999 at 11:45? You give it a sentence, but you say, I don't respect the string back. I expect the date time back. And so you're giving it a text about a certain moment in time, and it will return a date time based on the prompt that it executed using either local or remote models. And you're like, bloody hell.
Yeah. Just the way that it has been able to take these very, very not fun things to do and make it so you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
But so if we move forward even more, we're still in this mindset of, oh, we have a problem to solve, we need to write a program. It seems like we're going to get to the point where, my friends who are running the bookstore, they would simply say, oh, here's a new book, or take a picture of the books that just came in. Okay, now they're in the system. It knows physically where they are, and they don't actually have to write a program. They just use the AI for everything.
The programming language for the next couple of decades is the English language. Because you just write in English and it produces results based on your prompts. You don't write a code or a Java method to convert the text into a datetime. You give it a prompt with the information and it returns you the object that you want. So a lot of people are predicting that. That's basically...
There's been a lot of attempts at these like natural language programming languages. And I think I was seeing some tweets by Grady Booch around this. And he's like, the reason why we have programming languages is because often the things that you need to express aren't easily expressible in a natural language, which is very open to interpretation.
Correct.
And the reason why we have a more constrained language. And I kind of agree with part of that there are things that are really hard to express in natural language that are much easier to express in a programming language. But I don't know, maybe at some point the AI is smart enough that it can figure all that out.
Well, it would be, you're talking about a way to specify something. And yes, spoken language is very flexible, and so it doesn't have like type constraints and things like that. But through an iterative process, it would be able to say, you would say, oh no, that's not what I meant, do this, and then it would add to the specification and do this. But it would be interactive with the actual customer who's using this, the actual end user.
And you see the movement of like OpenAI last week also announced that they will support JSON even more strongly. So you can give it a prompt and it will return JSON. So that way you can really map it more easily.
And schema JSON, right? Yes. Like it was, so it wasn't just like ad hoc JSON, which, JSON can certainly be ad hoc. It was actually like you provide the schema and then what OpenAI gives you back is the JSON in that schema.
So I'm dumb here. What the JSON schema is like the type information?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like with XML we used to have as well. It really reminds me a bit of that.
The XSDs of XML.
Okay.
Exactly. But the beauty...
I remember when XML was going to be everything.
Yeah, exactly. But the beauty is like with LangChain4j, you have now these annotations where you have an annotation which describes what this method does. And because it's annotated, if you send it a prompt, it might return and say like, well, I don't know how to answer this, but I know that you need to call this method in this class to actually get the answer, because the annotation said that this method does, for example, multiplication of matrices, whatever. I'm just inventing something. And that's
So
the
the
tooling.
annotation describes the behavior of the function?
Yes.
Huh.
And that is included in the prompt. So if you give it a question, it will take that information with it and say, you're asking a multiplication. You're just giving me a method which does multiplication. So maybe you should call this method. And that's the whole tooling aspect. That's how it works. So you basically give it all the methods that you support. And if the model can't answer it, but it finds the methods that you've given it as a possible answer, it will say, call that method.
Wow.
And that's the tooling aspect. And then you have like agents, which will not only call the method, it will create a program like a Python program, compile it, and run the program for you. But the program that it creates could be something which the model generates based on your request.
So the agents are kind of like macros or something.
Yes.
They're generating something that then gets used to change.
And the tools are basically methods in a class that it might trigger based on the context.
And you're using LangChain4j on like the DevOps application to like power the tag summarization and other places as well.
Yes, and it's beautiful code. It's like really one-liners because it uses an interface. The interface has an annotation describing that, and it's beautiful developed. I mean, my hats off to the guy who did this, Dimitri. And since then, actually, Red Hat was so impressed of the DevOps talk about LangChain4j that they just hired him as a full-time employee to work on this full-time. But yeah, that's the way. If you're doing Java, there's basically a few options. Spring AI has also a prompting library, but I think the enthusiasm and the is really in the LangChain4j area for now, at least.
Yeah, on the JVM stuff. What else is interesting in this area that we haven't touched on so far?
Oh, what about artificial general intelligence? What's the story with that?
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we've already passed the Turing test, right?
Right, but we're still dealing with static models. I mean, we generate the model and it stays there. What we need
we're
is
just
the model.
moving the flag post constantly. Yeah, but we're not at AGI level yet because it can't do this or that. I mean, when Turing said like, if you talk to somebody, you don't know if it's a computer or not. We're already past that.
Oh yeah, but
years ago.
But what I want to know, I mean, it seems like so we're basing our models on a whole bunch of stuff off the internet, and there's a ton of BS on that. And what we need is a system that is more of a science machine, where it can say, okay, I need to verify this data, and it needs to tell us, or it needs to be able to do new experiments, the experiments that we haven't thought of and we can't think of. And it goes, boy, if I knew more about how grass grew, I would be able to answer a whole bunch of questions. So do that experiment.
I want to see new mathematical and physical, equations popping out, which we never thought about. We're not there, of course not, right? I mean, what OpenAI says is that we are at, so the GPT 4.5 or 4.0 is basically at a master's level for the moment. That's what they're referring to. What they're predicting is that GPT-5 will be at a PhD level intelligence. Now, if it is able to know all the PhD theses and index all of that, there's bound to be possibility. I mean, no human person in the world can know all the theses that have ever been published. If you have a model which knows this and can grasp it, there's bound to be new discoveries that it all of a sudden links few papers together that we never thought were possible.
Well, it's doing that kind of stuff now, able to say, you're able to say, hey, I need a new material that, I don't know, does heat transfer better or whatever. And it can look through all of its corpus and narrow it down and say, well, try these three things, rather than a chemist in the laboratory just randomly trying things.
The biggest question is that, have we plateaued with the model's knowledge, or are we still growing? And the majority of the engineers, they're saying it's still growing. It's still getting better with every release. So if we just extrapolate that, then AGI is around the corner. I think we will experience that in our lifetime.
I guess my question is, it seems like a really different thing when you're saying, okay, well, we'll run all our machines for 2 weeks and cost $100 million and create this static thing. And if we need another one, we'll do it again, versus something that can say, oh, here's a new piece of information. I will somehow incorporate that into my knowledge.
Well, the CTO from Facebook, Lacoon, he's a French guy. He says that we will not reach AGI with just large language models on its own. We need some extra innovation.
Right.
And QStar could be that missing link. QStar is an internal project in OpenAI where they found, but again, this is hypothetical because they haven't published anything. That's why they are called OpenAI.
For irony's sake.
Yeah. Where it actually finds the best route, but much faster. And there's so many eyeballs on this right now, so many bright minds looking at this, that it's bound to happen. And then we're just gonna, just think about it. I mean, it's science fiction that we're living it already. Not right now, even without the AGI, it's already unbelievable what it's able to do.
Solve the solid state battery problem.
Yes.
Go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, tons of things.
I'm really excited to be alive. I mean, just imagine what we've already experienced. The internet, smartphones. Now large language models, Java. It's just an exciting time. It's just exciting.
Yeah. Maybe by the time I die, I go, well, yeah, we used to use programming languages to do things, but nobody does that anymore.
Possible.
Oh,
it's totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just. I mean, there's definitely also some downsides here. I mean, if you just look at, have you followed what Grok has done? I mean, they released Grok 2 yesterday,
No.
And they've partnership with Flux, which is basically a Midjourney competitor to create images on text. And Alan, being Alan, he just said, well, there's no filtering, there's no guardrails, so you can say whatever. So you can say like, hey, create me a picture of this person with that person, and it will create a realistic picture where you go like, what the hell?
Yeah. So like the deep faking thing
yes.
is
So like the
absolutely going to get worse.
Oh yeah. But not only pictures, like videos as well. There's examples of people who are just speaking like I am now, but you would see Tom Cruise instead, or your father or your brother asking to send over money, and you with his voice, and you don't know what's going on, and go like, bloody hell.
Yeah. Authenticity.
We'll definitely need personal AIs to defend ourselves from stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, the arms race of AIs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I see a great possibility of, I have a friend who was the city attorney for Las Vegas for 35 years. And one of the things he was trying to solve was the homeless problem. And a number of cities have done this. And the ones that have been successful effectively required a therapist for each person on like a daily basis, which was just, incredibly expensive. But there are AIs now that people are using as therapists. And as we develop that, the mental health issue that everybody struggles with, that, having an AI on your phone that you can say, I'm struggling right now, and you're not making an appointment or you're not having to pay for it or anything, that I think is going to change the world.
Yeah. But not only that, Bruce, the fact that we now have a universal tutor for $20 a month.
Mm-hmm. That's going to change education.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has needed to been disrupted for a long time because it's built on ancient, outdated ideas. Yeah.
So anybody with internet and $20 a month to spare has an expert tutor next to him or her, and it can learn you whatever you want.
That's patient and non-judgmental.
Sorry?
That is patient and non-judgmental.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, Neil Stephenson wrote a book called The Diamond Age, and one of my favorites of his. And that's what he effectively had, the idea of a personalized AI for each student who knew that person and could help them develop in their own way.
Yeah.
Well, isn't one of the challenges in this space that today the models are mostly trained on human generated information, and that's important because then you have some connection to reality with the human being in the middle of maybe not.
Internet crap, not so much.
But isn't there some concern that as more of the content that is out there that the models are being trained on is actually itself created by AIs, that you get like this lossiness that gets worse as there's more, that loop becomes happening more. So I don't know if I'm saying that right.
But they call it synthetic data, so it's basically generated data by AI. But I think we needed the internet as a bootstrap, but now I think it's already beyond that bootstrap. I think it doesn't matter anymore. Because it has already enough knowledge now that if they basically index all the books that are available, all the theses and so on, I think it has passed that threshold. It has passed that. Yeah.
It needs a connection with the real world so that it can validate its data.
Well, that's the next point, right? It's the robots. Seriously. If you look at have you looked at Figure 02 robot? OpenAI has invested in that company. So they're merging OpenAI ChatGPT with a robot. But the robot has fingers with sensitive touch. And a friend of mine works there actually now. And it's
When
basically.
do the dishes for me?
What? You know him, Jo Voortakers,
Okay.
From the Parlays. He works there now.
Awesome.
Bloody hell. So they're basically merging a robot with ChatGPT together. Figure 02. Have a look at YouTube. You're going to go like, bloody hell. So they're next.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe I'll get to ride my mountain bike more in this future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That would be the best world, yes.
The thing is, we're living science fiction. I mean, I love science fiction movies, and Space Odyssey 2001. It's there. At least the communication with the robot, and open the pot, and what is it?
Open the pod bay door, Hal. No, can't do that.
Sorry,
exactly.
Dave.
We've reached that point.
Wild.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Stephan, I look forward to seeing you at Devox in a couple months. And
yes,
thanks for sharing all your knowledge and experience with us around LMs. That was awesome.
My pleasure, and it was really fun talking to you guys again. And I
great.
remember I've been to Crest Butte once with the Java Posse Roundup, which was an amazing experience. Yeah, so
we'll have to get you back here sometime.
Would be nice. I couldn't remember. I couldn't imagine that you could have so much snow on top of each other. Like, what was it, 3-4 meters? I've never seen that before. So that was a really nice experience.
We get a lot of snow.
We do.
Well, come back sometime.
Yeah.
All right.
Well.
Thanks, Stephan.
All right. See ya.
See you guys.